What's up, guys? Tailboard Misfits podcast on Firefighter Nation. We're here with Chief David Rhodes. Very excited to have him on. Before we get into him and his background and what we're going to talk about today, we just asked that if you find any value in the show, please just share the show. We don't have sponsors or anything like that, so by word of mouth is how we get the word out. And when it comes to Chief Rhodes specifically, the more people we get to listen to him, the better I think the fire service will be. So, Chief, how's it going this morning?
Good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. I've wanted you on the podcast for some time now. Obviously, there's baby steps to it, and when you, in the grand scheme of things, when you have things like the scrap and other really big that are into the hundreds of episodes, I kind of wanted to wait my turn and get a little established. But I'm glad I was finally able to reach out and kind of make this happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if the people don't know who you are, I'm sure everyone by now knows who you are. If you don't mind just giving a quick little bio of you and how you started in the fire service.
So I started back in 1985 at a small suburban little municipal fire department called Conyers Fire Department. It's about 25 miles east of Atlanta, Georgia. And I worked there for about 5 years, and then we consolidated with the county, which was Rockdale County. So I was there for, I think, a year and a half, almost 2 years, and then went to the city of Atlanta Fire Department in 1992 and worked there for 30 years. So that was my fire service career. In addition to all of that time, I was State Fire Academy instructor. I got involved in the Georgia Smoke Diver program really early, like around 1986, and have been an instructor there since then, and actually ended up running the program for many, many years, and started teaching at FDIC somewhere around 97, 98, and then moved into managing the hands-on training portion of it for, I guess 20 years or more. And then coming up on 2 years, I've been full-time, been retired 3 years from Atlanta. And then for 2 years, I've been full-time with Clarion Events, which owns FDIC and fire engineering. And, unfortunately, Bobby Halton hired me in August and then passed away in December. And so I became the editor-in-chief much sooner than it was supposed to happen. It was supposed to be like a 3-year transition, and it ended up being a 3-month transition. So so I'm the editor-in-chief of fire engineering and help coordinate all of the media group brands that we have, and then manage the education side of the Fire Department Instructors Conference.
Yeah. And I haven't been able to make it out to FDIC, but I know people that have, and obviously it's like the conference of conferences to go to. And I was listening to you speak, and it was probably the FDIC speech, one of them, the year that you ended up taking over. And there was a comment that you made that just really stuck out to me. And I guess you were having a conversation with Bobby, and he mentioned to you, you said, I think you were unsure of taking over that spot. And he mentioned to you, it's not a job, Rhodes. It's just another opportunity to serve. And I think it just stuck to me, because it's just like, man, you put in a full career at a busy fire department. If you've listened to other podcasts, you've put up with stuff on the admin side of things, and still you find the passion to still serve the fire service community. And what you're adding to the entire fire service, I think, is unmatched at this point. I think you do a really good job at it.
I appreciate that. Yeah, Bobby was a master at giving you the guilt trip, so he could get what he wanted, and it was all for good. It was all for good. So yeah, I'm glad he did it. It's been a crazy 2 years, definitely crazy since he passed away. It's been nonstop, but it is an incredible opportunity and responsibility to, represent the fire service and to provide a platform for the voices of people that may not, have the opportunity to be heard. And that's what we're constantly looking for is, who is out there with a great message, that needs to be heard, and how can we elevate that? Obviously, with social media, anybody can get on social media and have a say, but we have a lot of credibility in the industry because we do have an advisory board, a technical review board, and all of the stuff that we put out goes through a process. Not quite as heavily scrutinized as a total academic journal, but it's vetted, with a lot of intensity before we actually, publish. We don't just publish whatever.
Right.
And so, but on the other hand, we're not there just to represent one point of view either. That is, from the very first issue in 1877, the founders said this is a place where people can share ideas. And so we may publish an article from somebody that is a tactic that may not work in your department, but it may work in, 40% of the other departments, what have you. So it's not the one-stop shop that's always right for you, but it is a platform of sharing information about all aspects of the fire service.
And, as you were talking, I was sitting here remembering, because like I said, I've never been, but I obviously try to watch every video that's posted, from talks and everything at FDIC. And another just super powerful statement that you made was you weren't going to try to fill Bobby's shoes, but you were going to stand on his shoulders, and saying that you're going to stand on the shoulders of giants. So on the subject of FDIC, do you have like a 5-year vision of what you'd like to see come down the road for FDIC?
Yeah, we actually implemented a lot of new stuff last year. So in addition to our already incredibly popular hands-on training, we added hands-on workshops. And so we had 4-hour classroom workshops, and then we had regular, put you on a bus and take you out to a structure or a academy and do a 4 or 8 hour hands-on class. We tried a blended delivery, which was a couple hours of classroom and then a couple hours of hands-on that we could do on site there at the at Lucas Oil Stadium or at the Indianapolis Convention Center. And we didn't take proposals for those. We created those. It was kind of an invitation-only instructor. And of course, we got, some of the biggest name instructors that we could. We limited the class size to 30 versus 55 in a hands-on class. And it wasn't so much a hands-on class. There was no live fire. There was no, breathing air and a breathing apparatus, that kind of thing. But you got to flow water in Ray McCormick's class. You were in gear and you got to flow water and go through some standpipe stuff and stairwell stretches. There was school bus extrication, and you could participate in the cuts in the school bus as much as you wanted to if you had the gear, or you could just observe if you wanted to. So it was a different delivery. And we thought it may capture a lot of people that wanted that combination, especially like a training chief that wants to get sort of the classroom portion of the lesson and the hands-on together, but not necessarily need 100 reps forcing a door or what have you. So we pulled in, a lot of good folks. We had a through the lock forcible entry, and those guys had like 100 props. And we had the FDNY remote tactical training guys who basically, they taught 2 classes on how to take this little device here and create training lessons and broadcast them live out to your fire stations. So looking at it from a technology standpoint, that was, phenomenal. And they were all a hit. They all sold out. In fact, the hands-on and the hands-on workshops all sold out. And then we also introduced something new is a blend of education and exhibitor training. So we created a drill yard inside Lucas Oil Stadium that had a burn building. It had an extrication pit. It had a vehicle. It had some electric vehicles. It had some hybrid vehicles that were cutaways, and we had different groups teaching classes in that area during Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. So we had women in fire doing a fire attack and hose management class. We had Georgia smoke diver guys did a search class. We had ISFSI do a class in the burn building there, and then we also had companies like Bullard Thermal Imaging teaching a class on their new camera. So it was a pretty exciting and busy space, and it gave some free training opportunities for those people who may have just come for the exhibit, and for those who really I mean, you know how it goes. It's like the really gung ho folks, they come take the hot, and then if there's something else going on, they're going to do it too. So for 25, we're going to stretch some hot classes into the week, which has never been done. And we had a lot of requests for that. So, not 100% sure. We haven't picked the classes yet, but look for one or two either hot workshops or hot classes to be offered, like maybe Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, instead of the traditional Monday, Tuesday. But they won't be repeats of Monday and Tuesday. They'll be totally different classes.
That's super awesome.
So we're going to give that a shot, because some people, that's what they want to do. They want hands-on. And so we want to provide that opportunity for them. And then we've started a lot of micro events. So it's groups inside FDIC. We've already had relationships with several organizations that do that. We've got the National Fire Academy alumni. We've got the Department of Defense firefighters, the North American Training Directors, Women in Fire, and now we've added a Tall Buildings Conference within the show. We're looking at an industrial type event within the show, and we have an ARF event within the show, and these are very specific. So it's like very niche events that specialize in those areas. So there's something for everybody for sure. It is it's just incredible, and we set the record for attendance last year. Not only were all the classes sold out, but it was a record as far as attendance.
Wow.
By about 1,500 people.
Jeez.
So
that's awesome. And my goal is to get down to FDIC, hopefully within the next 2 years, maybe 3 years. So I'm waiting for my kids to get a little bit older, but
gotcha.
No. So I've heard you say this before. And once again, I kind of took a bunch of stuff that I've listened to you talk about, and hopefully be able to pull just a little bit more out of you, and kind of put my own spin on it to try and see if you had anything to add. So in one of your speeches, I've heard you say that there is sacrifice and suffering in everything that's good. And I love that quote, and I've heard it expressed in several different ways, but where my mind went, and we're talking about FDIC, so it's kind of fitting, is FDIC started this whole conference movement, in my opinion. Now there's conferences just about every state and at multiple times, or at the same time in multiple different places. And, you know, I've had conversations with guys. I've been to a lot of classes, and their departments won't pay for them to go. And I'm not in that position. My full-time department, they support us going, but they're not financially able to support that. But I'm very blessed on the volunteer side that they, you know, pay to send me to classes. But I try to tell guys I've paid for classes on my own, and I try to want them just to invest in themselves. And that right. Sacrificing, you know, time away from family, that's sacrificing money that they're making. But you're going to get so much out of it. And I was just curious on your thoughts on that, and if you had any advice or something to say to those kinds of people.
Yeah, you should be taking advantage of training wherever it's offered, and you can't expect your department to be able to cover everything. They should be able to cover the basics and make sure that you have the training that you need. But unfortunately, the fire department budgets have somewhat stymied innovation. And so there's a couple of things that have happened over the last couple of, at least the last 10 years, maybe 15, is that as budgets shrank, training staffs shrank, the training staffs are now basically chartered to do recruit classes and whatever the continuing ed requirements are. So if you've got to have, 40 hours of EMS continuing ed a year, then they provide that, or they provide a system to where you can get that. They do driver certification, and that's pretty much it. That runs the gamut. Every state's different. I know in Georgia there's like 100 and I think there's a 120-hour requirement for firefighter recertification each year. And then you got your ISO requirements. It's like, 200 and something, 220 maybe, or 240. So since the training academies have been relegated and limited by their resources, people have started doing their own training. And that's really where 95% of all the innovation is coming from right now, which is sad in one way, but it's cool in another way because it's not restricted by anything. That can be dangerous in one hand, since it's not under anybody's governance. I mean, they would still be held accountable to standards and training of live fire and should be following 1403 and all of those things. But there's really nobody to tell them no if they want to do something. And we went through that with Georgia Smoke Divers. We were a Georgia Fire Academy class for a long time. And there were certain restrictions on the training site through legislation, like you're not allowed to charge a fee for any in-state resident to take a class. It has to all be free. That was part of the agreement for the donation of the land, and it sounds good on the surface, but if you don't have a budget to support your class, then somebody has to pay for that class out of their pocket. So the instructors basically were paying for that class out of their pocket. And we started having some out-of-state students, like we'd let about 5 out-of-state students come. We charged them a pretty hefty price, and then that started funding the class. But all of that kind of went away, and we ended up breaking from them. And now we're able to charge a nominal fee that covers hotels and food and sheetrock and pallets and all of that. There's still it still couldn't be paid for if we were having to pay for everything, because there's a lot of donations and everybody is donating their time, and you're looking at 100 instructors a class, but we are at least able to cover the expenses without the guys having to come out of their pocket for sheetrock and fuel and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's been a pretty interesting transition from all of your training coming from a local academy, a state academy, the National Fire Academy, and a couple of like big conferences. And hands-on training as a concept actually started at FDIC, like around 97, 98. And it was called Hot Tuesday, and it was held in the parking lot. And then that expanded to, 30 classes off site, acquired structures. And it's been up and down. Kind of ran out of acquired structures because we used them all. That's always the hardest thing every year, is trying to find 1 or 2 acquired structures for certain classes. But it's still a valuable thing to have. And part of leadership is getting outside of your organization and seeing what other people are doing. And so that is an investment in itself, whether you're buying a book that's not on the station bookshelf for yourself to read, you're subscribing to Fire Engineering Magazine and getting it at your house. If you really want to be good and be the best that you can be, there is some personal investment and sacrifice that it takes to do that. I mean, there's no free ride. You might be able to function and survive, a 30-year career. But if all you do is whatever the department offers and you only read what the department puts out, then you're going to be pretty stagnant overall. And it's really interesting because some of the biggest offenders of that are the largest departments. They think they know it all, and they've got a big training ground and a lot of instructors and all that. And so they don't think they need and some of the attitude is like, what are those old volunteers out there going to teach me? Well, not all of the instructors are volunteers, but it's amazing whether you go to the smallest volunteer station or the busiest station in the country, there's something to be learned at each one of them. It may be the way they carry electrical cords a certain way in a bucket with a hole in the bottom, or just there's all kinds of innovation that is out there. And when you see it, you can bring it back to your department and it makes you understand the fire service better.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I've been to enough classes now where I can see like the good that it's actually doing in the fire service. And, I've attended several classes, but I wouldn't consider it a lot of classes. And I know I'm not the only one because I've had several conversations about this. And the only way I know how to put it is we go to these classes and we learn these new, if you will, techniques or tactics, right? And then the best way I know how to put it, you bring it back, and there's the older, more tenured firemen that, and I'm not using this as a specific example, but this is just something to relate to, is we're trying to tell these guys that have seen transitional attacks and fog nozzles work for years about the different tactics that we can use to fight fire now. And that's not the only way to do it, and try to get them into the research and data. And we just get pushback, right? Like that's not going to work. I've seen this work, hundreds of times. You can't tell me any differently. And something that I've tried to tell people is when you go to these classes, especially some of the bigger conferences like FDIC, is we're talking with people that have fought fire thousands of times, right? And I like to think that at my department, we see a fair amount of work in the fire side of things. And realistically, I think the person with the most fires has somewhere in the 300 to 400 range, right? And when you go to these classes, you're talking to people who've done it 3,000 times or more. And so it's just like, right, we can learn from those.
And then there's the 3 factor. So if a department, mid-sized department has 300 working fires a year, then you got to divide that by 3 because there's 3 shifts. Ideally, they're different schedules. And then you got to reduce that down to individual stations. Mm-hmm. And so there are not too many guys that are going to 300 fires a year.
Yeah.
There may be some somewhere, but if you're actually, if you're working 24, 48, you're working about 120 shifts a year ish, not counting your time off, not counting your vacation, holiday stuff, if you have that. So like if you're going to 60, 70 fires a year, that's a damn busy,
especially individual.
And really, if you're going to 30 a year, that's pretty busy. And if you look, obviously, I'm sure there's some Chicago, New York, there's a couple of Atlanta stations that have that volume of fire. But even those busy stations, again, you got to divide it by 3 and all. So, but it is. I mean, if you're going to a couple of fires a month, that's a good experience, that you're getting. And there's a tremendous value in being educated on the basics, going to advanced training, and then actually putting it into practice on the scene. And then you're experimenting And that's the problem with folks that don't run the fires, is that if they mess something up, they don't have the opportunity to try something different. How many times are they going to have a fire similar to that, on the third or fourth floor, or in a basement, or whatever it is? So it's tough to learn from your mistakes at a fire and then make corrections and go to the next thing, which is, that's what we do in sports. We're playing baseball. We strike out. The coach gives us a little extra batting practice, but we know we're going to bat again tomorrow in a new game. And sometimes in some organizations, those fires are spread so far apart that the lessons you learned at that last one are not transferred in. And that's where experience comes in. Right. And that's why it's important to have experience as an instructor, and it's important to have experience as part of a research panel, and all because you have some depth of and a good perspective to contribute.
Right. And I love that answer to that question. And I was sitting here thinking, like, I guess a better way to maybe ask that question is, when it comes to the guys, and for the most part, in my experience, it's a lot of less tenured, younger dudes that are pretty plugged in and eager for the job, that are going out to these classes and conferences and learning new stuff. How can we come back to our department and say, we respect your experience, because we have to respect experience over anything. But here's another way to do it without more or less insulting them or getting them to just say, no, we don't want to hear about that.
You just do it. And I used to kind of open up the smoke diver class with a little speech about how you do things at the fire station. And, if you're the only one at the station that is into working out, and you put on your gear, put on your pack, and run laps around the station, and you don't have to shame them and tell them they should be doing it. You just do it. And eventually somebody will poke their head out and be like, hey, what are you doing? At first you're probably going to get some ribbing and, take a little beating, mentally for it. And you just keep doing it. And, I think that's kind of a life lesson that, if I had to go back again, is you're always wanting to change people. You're like, hey, we got to do this, you got to do that. Just do it, and then people will follow along, and it'll eventually get momentum to where, if you're not doing it, you're not cool. You're not in the crowd. You ever seen that video, the leadership secrets of the dancing guy? It's just crazy. This guy just is out there, dancing like a fool, and one guy comes up and dances along with him, and then another one comes, then 3 more, then 10 more, then pretty soon 1,000 people are dancing, because at a certain breakover point, it's no longer dangerous to be there. So don't be afraid to take some ribbon, to be the guy that's out there. And what you'll find is, like you said, like if you bring something back, you kind of know who's going to be receptive to it. Then get with them first, and then just start doing it. And people will get so curious that they'll eventually come out. And if they don't, then over a period of time, they'll just become irrelevant. And so that's really a better strategy than trying to force something on to somebody from the bottom up. Like, you're accomplishing the same thing, but it's not obvious. And I love being covert. And I think that is, just a great tactic to take, is you just covertly, a buddy of mine says, quietly making noise. And so you just do your thing and get with a group of folks that like it, and push it, call them up, come do multi-company drill, and show it, and always invite them, but never, and what you're going to find is at dinner, they'll be like, what'd y'all do today? We just did some search, you know, kind of blow it off. And you're just making them more and more and more curious.
Yeah.
But it works. I mean, it's like a little lesson in psychology.
I love that answer, and I was hoping that was where we were going with that. And this kind of brings me to my next thing, and there's no doubt you hear it all the time, right? Like the American Fire Service isn't fighting as much fire as what we once were. That's true at my department, as well as just about every other one I could think of. But we're still going to fires, and the thing that I'm curious about is right now there's information at our fingertips, right? Like there's people like, and it's made easy, right? There's so many different websites that you can go into and read articles. Chief Kyle Romagus with the Bro Drive and has so much stuff in there. And so our less tenured guys, or even our rookies, they're coming into the fire service with so much education and so much information if they've put in the work to read, and research, but they're lacking in the experience department there. And so we have so much, all this knowledge and education with not a lot of experience. And realistically, it kind of goes into this whole battle between, you're doing all this stuff and watching all these other departments, and this is the way that we do it. And so if you had advice for newer firemen or even not newer firemen that have all this education, but don't quite have that experience level yet to back up what they know, what would you say to them?
If you don't have the fire volume to gain the experience, then you have to, at a minimum, be doing hands-on training daily. And that doesn't mean you're doing live fire training daily, but you need to do live fire training as much as possible. I know at one time in our department, we were on a path to track, since we had, computer reporting, we were going to track and see at the end of the year who had not been to a fire, and then schedule a live burn for those people so that they would at least get in, a live fire for that year. So you need to be looking for opportunities to do live fire training, but you got to do hands-on training with it. And this is it's not a fire service specific issue. It's been around forever. The most decorated Marine Corps guy in history, Chesty Puller, said it when he retired: "I fear we're becoming overeducated and underexperienced." And it's true with every profession, because knowledge is at our fingertips, whether you've gotten it formally or informally. If you want to learn something, it's out there for you. So yeah, you come in with good theory, and as they say with any incident management plan or any plan, it's only good till the first shot's fired for a battle, and really it's only good on a fire scene until you get to the scene. You can have all these standard things that are supposed to happen, and they're probably going to work 80% of the time, but you got to be flexible, adaptable, and experience gives you adaptability, where just knowing theory and having training is why people say, well, what's the way, what are we supposed to do? Well, there's no answer to that because it's situational. So just because you learn to force a door this way, this may be a different type of door. So you got to adapt to that door. Maybe you can't even see the door and you got to force it, but you didn't do that in your training. So you have to make training as realistic as possible, but you do it in phases. So you get good at a task, and then you add more adversity to it. You add more roadblocks, and you never really build anything that's not winnable, but you make it harder and harder, and then you add stressors to it. And that's where you get your adaptability. That's where you get your ability to improvise, and that's what makes a good firefighter and a good fire company.
Yeah. I'm going to pick your brain a little bit as a company officer, and I know you spend a lot of time as a battalion chief as well, and a pretty busy, department. a lot of times some of these things that we come up with, or maybe a tactics for a specific building, we don't ever really get to do it right because it's not burning all the time. But were you big on like smells and bells? Hey, let's run through our game plan for this. Like we go out for a fire alarm. Let's, deploy what we're going to deploy and set up the way we're going to set up.
Yes. We took advantage of the opportunity to take over the elevators anytime we had something in a high rise, to practice, elevator control, lobby control. And I did a lot of what we call tactical decision games. Even at the station level, it would be like just a picture, like a color picture, slap it on the table and say, I'm going to show you a picture for 15 seconds and you tell me what's your first move. So I was trying to keep everybody in a thinking mode all the time. And then, go down the line a little bit. It's the company officers that was battalion chief stuff. At the company officer level, then my job was to make sure everybody knew the tools and equipment on the engine or on the truck or on the rescue, whatever it was we had at that station. And we're proficient in all of that it was in good working order. And then I've always, and it's because of my background with smoke divers, is always looked at training in, all right, we can talk about how the tool operates. Now we got to go use the tool. Now we got to go use the tool under some circumstance, under some type of scenario that puts it all together. You can't just do one thing and expect to be good at it. And then when I was special ops chief, we had like Saturdays and Sundays were always big drill days. We would call all the special ops units together and do, some really cool stuff. Like we put an engine down in the gulch where the railroad tracks are, and it's probably about a 60-foot bridge that ran over the top of it. And we just create a scenario. We'd say, hey, all right, engine 6, you go down to the bottom. 2 of your guys lay up under the engine. The scenario here is a sinkhole with a dump truck. We got 2 people trapped, but you can't walk down there. So every piece of equipment, you're going to have to lift, you're going to have to crib, you're going to have to stabilize the patients and get them back up. But everything has to go off this bridge via rope. And then we would bring companies in. Think about getting 2 people up 60 feet out of a hole under this trap. You need a whole support team there to do nothing but logistics. So we would sometimes incorporate other units, and that would be their time to familiarize themselves with the rescue or our USAR truck or whatever it was. So that's the way you get the experience. And no mistake, it's not the same as actually being at an incident, but it's as close as you can possibly get. And just like a company officer or battalion chief doing computer simulations for fireground command, they call it sets and reps. Those are critical because you can't just go out and set a house on fire to command it and get your training. So you do as much as you can, as visually accurate as you can, and you just practice and practice. And you're going to learn. You're going to make mistakes during that. You're going to learn from it. And then you want to run that same scenario a couple of more times. So like we said, like coming back up to bat, let's do it a couple more times and see what it looks like now that we've got all the kinks worked out. So, yeah. So that was a big part of my strategy. And I loved, whether it was hose training, we ran through the NFPA hose drills every year at a certain time, made it like a competition, almost like a driver's competition, to see who was the fastest on certain one of those drills. And that's where you got to pull up, get a water supply, flow a 2.5 and 1 3/4 on one drill. You got to flow a ladder pipe on the next drill. And so we would keep those times. And then, sometimes I'd have like a little trophy for whoever had the fastest time. So that added a little bit of stress to it. It was good stress, but it wasn't just coming out and going through the motions, because after a couple of years, it's the same drills every time, but they were required, or they're supposed to be required, And so we would do that and try to make it fun.
Yeah.
You know?
So there was one thing I wanted to talk to you about, and it kind of goes along these same lines. And I think I heard you first speak about it on the scrap, and it was when you were still on the job in Atlanta. I guess you were, and you could correct me if I'm wrong because I'm just trying to remember off the top of my head. It was the big incident with the 2-story house, and there ended up being a Mayday. Luckily, that fireman, I think, was off the job for a few months, was able to come back. But you guys, you and the other battalion chief, I believe, were heavily scrutinized for, and I believe charged for what you did on that fire, the tactics you employed. And these are obviously, like, just talking to you now, I can obviously make this assumption, but these were tactics that you had trained on, that you believed in, that you had gained that knowledge from, that you believed to be best to fight that fire. And they were unsupportive of that on the administrative level. And I could think of several people off the top of my head from all over the country that I've talked to that are kind of sitting in that same boat. Some of the tactics they're trying to implement in their department, some of the training and techniques that they're trying to implement are just super unsupported by their administration. And so I was wondering, like, how did you mitigate that? How did you navigate that and that during that time, and see if you could shed a little light there?
Yeah. So we weren't charged with anything that we did tactically. In fact, when we went in for our meeting and the operations chief told us that we were being charged, and it was myself, I was a battalion chief, Todd Edwards was a battalion chief, and Chris Wessels was the shift commander. And the three of us had charges filed against us. And we asked the chief, we were like, what exactly did we do? Because we want to learn. I wasn't so much against the charges as like, okay, what did we do that was wrong? And he said somebody got hurt. That was why we had charges filed on us. There was nothing that he could speak to, and I don't think that he actually even understood any of the tactics at that point anyway. But the charges were filed almost as a CYA for the administration, because I mean, the guy, Clark Glass, who's a phenomenal friend and smoke diver instructor and just an all around great guy, he had some pretty significant burns. He was out over 6 months, and he still has some issues with it. We had another guy that broke a foot and tore some ligaments that was out. I think he may even been out longer than Clark with all that stuff repairing. So yeah, there were some people that got hurt. We were doing what our department did at almost every fire, which was using our people for overhaul. And we had a collapse, while we were doing the overhaul. And there was a change of administration, interestingly enough, and the new operations chief came in. And when he came in, I actually went to him. This was probably a year or a year and a half later, and said, hey, just FYI, I don't even know if you know this, but me, Todd, and Chris all have these charges on us hanging over our head, and nobody's interviewed us. Nobody's done anything with it. And so he said, okay, I'll take a look at it. And he personally conducted the investigation, interviewed us all, pulled the tapes, pulled everything. And the conclusion was that we did a phenomenal job, followed every fire department policy and procedure, and totally cleared us. But that was a 2-year process. So, that was kind of our culture. There's a lot of CYA, a lot of filing charges. That wasn't the only thing, that was just one of many. And so we kind of got into that whole safety mode where if anybody got hurt, it was automatic that somebody was getting charges filed on them, which was pretty toxic. But, I guess with my involvement in the fire service as a whole, Atlanta wasn't my only, piece of the puzzle. And so, it got to a point where I focused my creative self and training and stuff in other areas versus, um, inside the Atlanta Fire Department, as did a lot of people.
Yeah.
So luckily they're not in that same position anymore. All of those folks have moved on. And actually that operations chief that did the investigation and cleared us is now the fire chief.
Good deal. But and I just know that there's, obviously I feel like I hear about it all the time that, just like you said, when something happens, someone has to be held responsible, and right or wrong, it's an unfortunate thing that a lot of fire departments go through. And so I just know that there's people out there that, and I get what you're saying now, like they weren't necessarily criticizing the tactics or anything like that. But I mean, there are people out there that do, get criticized for trying to implement some more aggressive, if you will, firefighting tactics that are very warranted, and they get a little pushback. So
yeah, it's there's a knowledge gap in between a lot of the administrative people and what's happening on the ground. And, it's happened over time before, but again, you get your training academies can only do the fundamentals and the basics and the research. These guys are going out and getting the latest and greatest information somewhere else. And a lot of the people in administration, they're not going out and getting that information, and so they don't see it firsthand. But the good thing is, I think, this has been going on. This has been going on for years, but I see that we are starting to turn the corner with it. We still have a long way to go, but with all the data that is out there, with the research that has been done that can point back to victim survivability, how long we know that from the time a unit arrives on the scene that a victim has, it changes as they get more data, but like 78% chance of survival if we get them out within 4 to 5 minutes. Then it drops a little bit after 5 minutes. It drops a little more at 6, and it continues to drop to where, like, once you get up to 10, 15 minutes, then, they don't have a very good chance of surviving. And so we're equipped with that data, but there's just still a lot of negative, there's actually a lot of false beliefs out there. And I actually talked a little bit about this year in the FDIC, is that nobody really gets all crazy about a firefighter dying off duty from a heart attack. Could be counted as a line of duty death. It's sad, it sucks, but we just we've accepted that. It was the number one killer forever. And there's been some changes, there's some obviously there's some entrance exams. If you follow the IAFF and the IAFC fitness information, that you have to have those NFPA physicals and you have to participate in these programs and all. But for the most part, we're okay with a 350-pound dude that's out of shape and has a history of cardiac problem being a firefighter. But we freak the hell out when somebody once a year falls through a roof. And so we cancel all roof operations. But we don't do anything about the 500 or 600 that are dying from these like systemic health problems that maybe shouldn't have been let in the fire service or should have had other resources or requirements. And so, it's again, it's human nature. More people die in car wrecks a year than they do in plane crashes. But when a plane crashes, it gets news and it's dramatic. And so people are afraid to fly, but they're not afraid to get in their car, even though, somebody's dying every 10 seconds or whatever the stat is. So it's the same for the fire service. When somebody, which is a very, very, very small number, when you back out the apparatus rollovers the heart attacks, sedentary heart attacks, not ones that occur on the scene, the cancer, long-term exposures, and you strictly go to those killed in the line of duty fighting fire, or and I'm not even talking about on the scene, because I mean somebody could do something, just drop over from an aneurysm on the scene. I'm talking about the fire itself. There was either a collapse or they got caught in a flashover and burned. It's less than a handful every year, you know, and it's hellacious and tragic. But in the scheme of what you say you're trying to prevent, line of duty deaths, we go too far the other way with some of the policy and all. And you know, it's really starting to surface. I wondered how long it was going to take to get into the fire service, but I don't know if you saw, actually it was in Texas, but they just convicted the police chief in Uvalde for not taking action. The officer was already crucified for not taking action. We go all the way back to Columbine, where it was wait, surround, huddle the resources, develop your IAP, do all that stuff. Well, I think the majority of the fire service is right there right now. They want all the risk mitigated before we're allowed to go in. 2 in, 2 out, water supply, 360, all this stuff. And there's a group of folks that have been screaming for some 20 years. We have to look at this almost as a drowning kid in a pool. Time is against the victim. And we're not saying to be reckless, but people don't train on how to search. They still just teach left hand, right hand. There are departments that prohibit vent, enter, and search. Probably the number one most effective rescue search plan that there is. You're not going to search efficiently and find somebody quickly dragging a hose line. Do you need a hose line in? Absolutely, but not the search team. The search team doesn't need a hose line all the time. And there's a difference in going in a grocery store and searching that's huge versus searching a 1,800 square foot house. So we have to have different tactics for different situations, and we can't restrict ourselves in that 2,400 square foot house like we do a Home Depot or a grocery store or something like that. Obviously, you got to if I'm going in that Home Depot, I want a rope or a hose line so I can find my way out. But in a 1,400 square foot house, there's a way out in every room. You know, so I can do things a little bit different. If I got a fire on the first floor of a 2-story, yeah, I want to get a hose line in on the first floor if the fire's on the first floor. But that doesn't stop me from laddering and going in the second floor independently. We know we can shut a door and stop a fire for 20 minutes. That's as good as a nozzle, you know. So I understand there's departments, there's administrations that are scared of these tactics. They are scared of the tactics because they are ignorant and they don't understand. They think that it's a cowboy tactic, but it's not. If you train on it, you understand building construction, you understand fire behavior, and you understand your equipment and your staffing levels, and it's different everywhere, but you can train to what you have, and you can do these things in a risk managed way. It's never safe. I mean, running into a burning building is never going to be safe. It is a process of risk management. And it's a shame that you got $15,000 worth of equipment that you're not allowed to use. And, you know, I'm around aggressive, super knowledgeable people all the time. And I don't know one of them that wants to commit suicide in a fire. I know they are all weighing the risk, but they're very smart and they do these things. And about the only thing that ever gets them hurt or whatever is a total unknown. There's a propane tank in the kitchen. Well, we can't go to every incident thinking there's a propane tank in the kitchen. It's risky. There's risk involved in everything. So we went too far. The pendulum swung too far one way, but it's these outside training groups. It's a few. I don't even know how many. I wish I did. I started thinking about putting up a social media post is like, who are the most progressive chiefs out there that aren't light them and fight them, yeehaw, that are truly professional but aggressive. They train their people. They know what their limitations are, but they let their people do the job. And I think that's not a very big list. It is a list. It's enough to have a list, but it's an interesting thing. I know that I was speaking with my buddy Victor, who runs the National Fallen Firefighters Foundation, and they are actually having a meeting in August to revisit the life safety initiatives. There's some realization that there may need to be some changes in language and stuff, but words matter, and how we put stuff out can help shape that, so that we don't have just total recklessness and a lack of understanding of fire behavior. And the guy thinks, if that room's on fire, I got to throw the hose in through the window and then climb in that room before I open it. And we have to do better at managing those individuals too, because unfortunately, for every 10 that I say have the warrior mentality that are smart, aggressive, and they do know the job and they know how to manage the risk, there is that one that is just a wildcat. But what they do ends up getting pinned on the other 10. And if we don't snatch them by the coat and go, dude, what the hell are you doing? Do you know how stupid that was? You don't have to crawl through the fire,
Right.
And burn your gear up and all that. There's another way we can do this and accomplish the same thing. And we got to do a better job at patrolling that. And that'll help the guys who are have the skills.
Right. I think when you were talking about the whole pendulum thing, is if you even are remotely active on social media, you probably see it. And one of the things that came into my head was, I believe it was the Baltimore City fireman that died while searching, a proclaimed vacant. And then you go to the comments and it's a bunch of firemen, arguing, why are we searching vacant, structures? And it's just like, man, like the data is there that we find people in those buildings all the time. So it's just like you said, that pendulum swings one way, very hardcore, and then it'll come back. And the whole comment on being aggressive rather than reckless is, one of my buddies says, there's one small difference in between being reckless and aggressive, and it's just intentionality, right? You could be aggressive with intent, and that's not reckless. And I loved that thought process.
Yeah. And, if we go back to the model that was put out there about we risk a lot to save a life. We risk, little to save little, what have you, to save property. If we really hold true to the words in that, then it all makes sense. The problem is in the interpretation, because there's a group that wants us to assume a structure is vacant until we get some additional information. And we just can't do that. But then on the other hand, there are some buildings that, like, we shouldn't even be going in if they weren't on fire. And so we need a system. Well, we need to tear all those down. That's what we need to do. You know, if you're really serious about it, you get rid of those. But that's where it comes in. But we know now, again, a lot of people who push, they push change. Well, now this change is coming from the bottom, and they don't want that change because they don't understand it. And when I say they're ignorant, I don't mean they're stupid. They're just ignorant on what good search tactics are, what you can and can't do without a hose line, and how you apply that in different situations. And it's hard to do all the training and get your people up to speed, in addition to keeping up with their mandatory hours and all of that stuff. But you have to do it. We have to change the model. And it doesn't mean that we throw out everything that's already there. But, you may have heard, I've written about it and I've said it, it's embarrassing to know that we have a unit on the scene and we're doing all the things on our checklist. We're hooking to a hydrant. We're conducting a 360. We're pulling a primary and a backup line, all with like 3 guys, hopefully 4, sometimes 2, but we're doing all those things. And then a cop pulls up on the scene, walks in 100% polyester uniform and patent leather shiny shoes, and walks the old lady out of the house. So she was in there 3 or 4 minutes that we could have, we can't treat everything the same. Now, obviously there's fire blowing out of every window. We take a different course, but if we just got, some moderate smoke showing and all, we can pass some of those things to the next crew and knock out a quick search, and you go to an apartment. I mean, think of all the places, hopefully you're confined to that one unit. There's a lot of places that need to be searched that don't need gear, that you can pull a civilian off and say, go knock on that door and see if anybody's, in there. You got a 16 unit apartment with some decent fire in the middle on the first floor. You need a lot of help, but you don't need $15,000 worth of gear to be able to search some of those places. So it's a struggle. It is a struggle, and I'm giving a lot of those people the same advice that I gave you about, at the station, is like, just do it. Just train your station on how to do it, and then train your battalion or the next station over in the battalion. And it will eventually take hold, because just like the cops, the citizens are going to hold us accountable. Right now, we have cover because we can burn the house to the ground and they think we did everything that we possibly could, and they bring us ice cream the next day and say, thank you so much. I lost all my stuff, and but thank y'all for everything you did, because we have the good guy reputation. But that's quickly changing. There's actually a couple of cases right now where fire departments are being sued, and they didn't go in to make a rescue. And then we've got tons of news. We've got the Polk County incident that reinforces that, where the lady was on the phone for 10 minutes and nobody even told the people on the scene that there was a lady on the phone. And if you listen to that, they went by the checklist, did everything. I mean, that dude would have made 100 on the promotional exam, and then there's one, I think in Indiana, where like the lady calls and she says her and her husband are trapped in the bathroom, and they get there, they go defensive immediately. And 20 minutes later, she calls back and says, hey, is anybody going to come in here and get us? We're still waiting. And so go back to the research, closed door. If you're closing the doors, man, your window entries, you could basically have a 90% involved house. There's probably one room somewhere that you can get a search on. and there could be a viable victim in that
Mm-hmm.
room. So we have to go to these incidents with that mentality. We go to search, and we have to do a lot of things in order to be able to search, but that should be our priority.
Right. So I did want to talk about one other thing before we close it out, and it's something else you talked about is the fact that there is a culture war right now in the American fire service, and we could put that on many different levels, but when it comes down to it, it's culture, and culture's nowadays it's this huge buzzword, as it rightly should be. But we have like you said, the checkbox, fire departments, the checkbox, crews, stuff like that. And you mentioned the revolutionaries, the page out there that are talking about the hard stuff and kind of pushing the grain a little bit when it comes to that stuff. And I feel like and maybe it's just because I'm more plugged in and I know more of the plugged in firemen than I do not so, but I feel like we're turning a page there. And I feel like the culture war is starting to fall in our favor. And I know that what it takes is in most cases, right? We've all sat here and talked about administration, and that's probably the case in a lot of departments for multiple different reasons. It's going to start at the bottom, whether that be a fireman or an officer, and have to eventually work its way up. So I wanted you to kind of talk about that a little bit and what your thoughts were on the culture war and how we get more people on the same page as us.
Yeah, that's it. It is. I think we've turned the corner. We realized we went too far, so we're starting to turn the corner, and people are starting to take notice. There's a few more people looking at things like VES, and they're taking the time. They've heard it so much now that they're having to take the time instead of just closing the door in their brain. They're actually saying, "All right, well, everybody's talking about this now, so let me go investigate a little bit more." So that's happening. The training that's going on, that's so accessible. There's a conference every week, and we encourage people to go to as much as you can. Definitely support whatever's close to you. Obviously, I'm going to tell you should come to FDIC, but we know that's a big thing. It's 37,000 people, and it's hotels, and it's expensive and all, but you still need to come because that's where the entire fire service is. The people who build the trucks, the people who build the tools, there's nothing like it. But you need to go to those local events as well, because you're getting out of your box and you're learning things that you're not learning in your own department's training. And they're again kind of like those chiefs that are very in tune. There's also training divisions that are very in tune, and they are teaching some of this, but a lot of them don't have the resources. So that was the intent. There was to do a couple things with the revolutionaries. Standards dictate training, curriculum, testing, certification, and all that. So it was a call out to everybody who's doing the training, who's doing research, who's doing things to improve the fire service, to not just get into doing the things that are fun, get involved in writing and rewriting the standards, because when the standard changes, then everybody falls in line. So if there was a standard out there that had those statistics about rescue in it and the survivability, then there would be tactics developed to meet those statistics. There would be techniques. They're already out there, but now they would become accepted by a group of people who only look at the standards. Now, well, why are we doing that? Because it's not in the standards. Those are minimum standards. Those are, the minimum level of requirements. And so I want to see more of the people who are pushing from the bottom up, getting involved in writing the books, writing the standards, and at least having influence in how they're created, and asking questions in the committees. to get them to think and to start making those changes, because that's when big change occurs. The other change of the local fire conference and learning and going back to your station, as you know, because you've already said, it's like pushing the rock up the hill. When you get something in the standard, then it's like you've reached the top of the hill and you've pushed it over. And now it just rolls on its own and everybody's adopting it. All of a sudden, there's no risk in adopting it now because it's in the standard. So it was both a compliment at all the great work that's being done and also a challenge to do more of the not so fun stuff to accelerate this turn in the culture.
Yeah. No, I love that. And, I've known people that I talked to that have tried to, interject in some of the panels, and some of them got selected, and they definitely took the message that you had to heart. And, now I think the right word that you used was infiltrate some of these organizations that influence the standards that we all follow, or at least
that was a carefully crafted word. I said words matter.
Yeah.
So I purposely used that word because it's sexy.
Yeah.
It's what our people like. Oh, this is covert. You could strip the curtain back and say participate. All right. But in our mindset, infiltrate is a much better word. And it's really the same thing. But if you have that revolutionary mindset, then you think about, okay, well, I'm not an admin guy, but I'm going to go be on the SOP committee to keep my eye on what they're doing in there. So I'm infiltrating, and in return, you're participating in the process. And it's important. It's important. I can tell you, I can tell you tons of examples of standards that, had there not been a line guy on that committee, there would be some crazy stuff going on, And there's a lot of bad information out there, like about NFPA and how they operate and everything. And so it's really interesting because in a certain circle, it's like the evil beast up above us. But it's firefighters that write those standards. There's industry people too, but a lot of people think, well, it's 90% industry and a couple of fire guys. No, they have a formula. Like, it can't be dominated by one group. And if it is, the fire service actually has an advantage because they give the union so many spots, and then the fire service separately so many spots, then the manufacturers. So it can't be dominated by one. It's just a matter of participation. And again, it's hard to participate because you have to pay your own way. And if your department doesn't pay for you to go, it's just like going to fire. You have to come up with the money yourself. But even if you're not selected for a committee, everybody can comment. Every single NFPA committee has a web page. They have a status. You can read what's coming up and you can comment. Most people only know that through like the last couple of months of, hey, comment on 2 in, 2 out and all. But that has been the process for years and years and years. Everybody can comment, and that's important. And it's just like the political process. People say, you need to email your congressman, you need to email your citizen, you need to, your senator, you need to email your local representative, whatever. That's who makes the laws and puts the budgets in. And if you sit silent, then they call it the silent majority, right? Everybody knows it's wrong, but nobody speaks up. So you got to take that extra time to speak up and send in those comments. And, you can collaborate on that, get a group together. You might not have got picked for this committee, but like, let's take this, and you take this part, I'll take this part. And now let's craft our comments and let's all send in this similar message. And it has an impact. It really does.
Yeah. And you never know. It could end up being the next, firefighter rescue survey, right? Like, that started on a whim. And same thing, I think, with like Project Mayday and stuff like that puts out really good.
Another bottom up initiative.
So I like that. So initiating another like call to action, get involved with some of these organizations and get on a panel to try and implement some change.
And I know it's a good, people say, oh, that guy's into the job, that guy's into it. And I always use that and say, it's not enough to be into it, because like I'm into college football. So if you're into something, that means like you like it and you're following, but like you could be the biggest buff in the world and just be into the job, but not really know that much about it. You've got to totally dedicate and be committed to the entire fire service, which means soup to nuts. You got to train, you have to read, you have to always be learning your whole career. You have to participate in these processes. You have to get promoted. It's the full deal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can be into something and have a lot of swag and a lot of tats and you're into it, but you're not really great at it.
Yeah.
That
it does.
Sense. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing when people say that, but it's like, if you really think about it, it's more to just being into it.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Chief, we're coming up well over an hour at this point. I want to be respectful of your time. I just want to say I appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing what you have to share, which is very, very good information, and it's very valuable to the fire service. As I've said before, man, I'm a fan, and I'm a big believer in what you are specifically doing, and with FDIC and fire engineering and all that. I love all the information that comes out of there. And once again, I just really, really appreciate you coming on.
Awesome, man. Well, hopefully we'll meet in person.
Hopefully
soon.
So. Guys, once again, if you find any value in the show, please just do us a favor and share. This is being streamed, so just set a reminder. You can get a reminder every time this podcast comes up on Facebook or whatever you're watching on or listening to. So appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next one, guys.